Welcome once again to our study of Omniscient Jigme Lingpa's Treasury of Precious Qualities. And as always, we want to begin with an awareness of the nature of suffering universally and recognize how this present study is part of the remedy for this condition of suffering. Overall, we recognize how the Buddhist teaching sidesteps two very dominant discourses that we have in the world in terms of suffering in general. And one is that suffering comes due to some external agent, that there's some creator that has created everything. We can't explain why, it's all very mystical, but that's how it is because it's all very big and indescribable, inconceivable. And so there's something out there that has created everything. And that's a very disempowering perspective. And that's quite dominant, of course, in the context of religions and so forth. That's one perspective. The other perspective, equally disempowering, is that we're part of a meaningless universe in which just randomly we have no control over the circumstances and are essentially just victims of powers, again, that we can't control. And that's where the Buddha begs to differ on both these accounts. The Buddha identifies how the nature of reality is not the way that we ordinarily think of it, as being some external reality out there, independent from us, but identifying how it's our individual subjective disposition that creates the particular realities we experience. The Buddha then understands that whatever suffering there is, however we relate to our experience and so on, comes about through a cause. So when there is suffering, this comes about due to essentially a cognitive dysfunction in which we misunderstand the nature of reality. We misunderstand and misconstrue the nature of consciousness, diminishing consciousness's, you could say, innate primordial purity, and diminishing it into this condition of dualistic sense of self and other. And this, of course, is not because sentient beings, there's anything wrong with them. There's an innocent quality in this, but nevertheless, just like we don't recognize a dream, then sentient beings, also not recognizing the nature of reality, continue to suffer. And so the Buddha, he understands suffering as not something that's given from an external agent, nor as something that just inevitably happens in a meaningless universe, but as something that comes about due to causes and conditions. So these constitute the first two of what we call the Four Noble Truths. And the third noble truth is then understanding that this suffering is removable. There's cessation, there is the possibility to eliminating this cause of suffering altogether, awakening. And for this purpose, then, the Buddha prescribes a path. And so in the Four Noble Truths, we really have this understanding of how suffering comes about, that it's curable, and what we need to do. So as we undertake this present study, we do so with a very empowered perspective that we understand how suffering comes about and we intend to do something about it. And we do this then on developing the prajna, the wisdom that begins to cut through this confusion. And we can say any aspect of the Buddhist path really serves to heighten this capacity of insight, the capacity to see through delusion, see through deception. So whether we're studying the path or critically analyzing the path or actually engaging in the practice of meditation, at all these counts, we're actually remedying this condition of confusion. So in that way, presently with that awareness, then we generate the motivation to approach this particular subject really with the intention to ultimately apply it so that we can deliver sentient beings from their condition of suffering. So in the study of Jigme Lingpa's text, we are just at the beginning, and we are presently then going to be looking at Kangyur Rinpoche's commentary with regards to the first few slokas. We'll actually begin, sorry, I forgot that. We'll begin with opening supplication to Jigme Lingpa. The source of love and compassion for all beings, who knows all that is knowable, emanation of Longchenpa, heir to a treasury of mind terminus, sky-like yogin of the vast expanse of luminosity, Jigme Lingpa, at your feet we pray. And then the text itself. So we looked at yesterday the opening verses, the prologue, the title, the commitment of the author, and also the circumstances through which this teaching then came about. And so now we're looking at then really the beginning of the first chapter, in which in Jigme Lingpa's root verses, then it says, so long, rather than chapter 1, which is then about the value of human existence. He says, he writes, so long enchanted in samsara's wilderness, tormented by the cutting of their heads and limbs, with seeds of future sorrow hidden in their minds, beings long so foolishly for bliss of higher realms. From there they fall again, their states of mind destroying them, to wander in 3 evil realms, or as insensate gods, or else in barbarous lands with false views, handicapped in places where the Buddha have not come. So again, where Buddhism differs from the science that we were brought up with is that it does not exclude the subjective. And as we have it with the old Greeks, really, philosophy and the inquiry into knowledge was primarily about the experience of the individual. And of course, natural sciences had a role, but not as a primary concern. And so in this, similarly, also the Buddhist teaching is very much, you could say, centered around understanding our experience as innately grounded in the subjective dimension, and in not excluding that. Buddhist science operates with essentially 2 experiences, 2 phenomenologies that we can call samsara and nirvana. And nirvana is the condition of the original uncorrupted clarity of mind, whereas samsara is this confused condition. And so when we approach the Buddhist teaching, samsara is really like the illness or the delusion, this cognitive delusion in which we then experience continual suffering. And this is understood to come about due to a subjective delusional condition. And it is that which is remedied through the path. It's not remedied through manipulating the external circumstances. Just like in the context of a dream, we're not going to, we can rush about trying to do things within the dream, but ultimately, really, the conditions of the dream, they're addressed through awakening from the dream altogether. And unfortunately, the condition of the dream that we have within delusion is one that centers around this toxic condition of delusion that fixates on a self, this narrow insecurity of self that continually struggles with regards to what it likes and dislikes. And in this condition of distraction, this condition of delusion, it continually perpetuates this toxic experience of the kleshas. And these kleshas are then, on the basis of likes and dislikes, the various toxic conditions, the afflicted states of mind that perpetuate a scenario of suffering and a scenario of projecting onto the phenomenon, or you could say the field of experience that then consolidates the various realms of samsara. And so when we come across the descriptions of samsara and the conditions of suffering and so forth, these should be understood really as coming from a greater science that has not excluded the subjective, and as such then understands how the subjective mind projects and creates these realms of suffering. And in this way, samsara is not understood as some sort of, you could say, cultural belief system or some metaphysical proposition that as Buddhists one then subscribes to. but should be understood really as they're coming about from a rational science that takes a different angle and does not exclude the subjective, does not exclude consciousness. And in this way, then, we approach this really as an insight that comes about from a greater science that understands really what happens with the mind. And of course, we can understand that in a modern context in which we're familiar with a materialist science, then this is relegated to the domain of religion, and as such, very often is associated with ignorant beliefs and so forth. Of course, very often religion is sort of has respectable aspects, and there's sort of a fair bit of lip service and courtesy being paid to religion. But very often the modern educated person assumes that this is very much about belief and not really understanding that this comes about through, you could say, the same valid epistemic premises as we have when it comes to the what we call natural sciences. So in this way, we should understand this, you could say, approach this in a rational manner and simply just identify this as the insights that come from a much greater science that incorporates and embraces what really is the central, most, you could say, key element of our experience, which is the subjective consciousness. So in this way, what we look at here in terms of the realms of samsara are really what is known on the basis of direct experience by those who are not deluded. And in this way, this is also something that we can validate on the basis of our own critical inquiry. But having done that inquiry, we then proceed to actually look at the path itself, which is the application. That is where we need to appreciate then the points that are being made here by Jigme Lingpa in terms of the situation of samsara as something we need to extract ourselves from. We have an illness, we have a disease, we have a delusional condition that presently can be remedied. So the skillful means in this lies in initially appreciating that presently we have every condition in our hand to remedy this, and understanding the ramifications of samsara. We're about to do something about it, and we above all appreciate that presently we are not held back by particular circumstances that would prevent us from remedying these situations. So as such, then we look at these first two verses of Jigme Lingpa, understanding the sorrowful nature of samsara, and understanding that unless we do something about these conditions, then we are destined to continue within this cyclic existence. So then in this study, then Kangyur Rinpoche, in the first chapter, speaking then about the value of the immensely precious human existence that we presently possess, he then comments on these verses, saying, "For ages we have lingered in samsara, unaware of its defects, believing that it is wholesome, a wholesome, beneficial place. And yet it is a state in which suffering and its causes abound, and where the qualities of liberation languish and wither. It is a desolate wilderness in which many times in the past our bodies and minds have burned in agony and have endured the pains of mutilation and decapitation. Moreover, latent within us, there are still many karmic seeds that will provoke such sufferings in the future. Human beings generally do not see this and are thus not only without regret for their condition, but actually crave the transient and futile pleasures of the higher realms." So this is what Kangyur Rinpoche sometimes refers to in terms of samsara as the sort of the deceptive quality of samsara, because it just seems to work. The relationship between our actions and the effects and how our world functions seems to be so logical and predictable, and we share this perception with others. So as such, we are very much lured into this deceptive condition of samsara, simply just thinking it in terms of how it so clearly just seems to function. And as such, we are completely sort of fail to see the nature of this delusional condition that drives these projections. And like I was just talking about, we then have this condition of delusion that is in no way contingent on just the material, but is very much a product of this mind, which again is not dependent on the physical body and projects and embodies itself as lifetime after lifetime. Yet, ignorant about this fact, then just essentially stuck on the appearances and the superficial perceptions that we have, then we're stuck with this sort of hankering for just, you could say, gratification, hedonistic pleasure within our particular present experience as humans. And of course, this is particularly pronounced in the modern realm, in the modern world, where more than ever there is this sort of nihilist attitude that, you know, when you're dead, that you only live once and so forth. That kind of dominant discourse very much leaves us just thinking, well, there's nothing more to life except just have a good time. And so in that way, with very little understanding really of cause and effect beyond just what sort of serves our immediate purposes, there's no understanding really of what we call the actual realms of samsara. And this is where we need to, well, here, if you're here present in this class, you're presumably someone who, you could say, gives the benefit to the doubt of the sages of the past and following the Buddhist path, are listening, willing and open to listen to what is to be said about this condition of samsara. And that is then where Kangyur Rinpoche continues, totally aware, referring to sentient beings, that they should engage in virtue and refrain from evil. They pass their lives sunk in negativity. Theirs is what is called a mere human existence. By their negative actions of thought and deed, they destroy themselves and render meaningless the freedoms and advantages of their human condition. So that's why we would say just being born a human is not really more than just having this human body if there's no real awareness of the causes and conditions that drive both the happiness of the higher realms and the suffering of the lower realms and the possibility of freedom altogether. So we have the footnote that says, generally speaking, there are three types of human existence: merely human, milu sampopa, as described in the text; special human existence, milu kiprachen, which is, for example, in which actions and attitudes oscillate between virtue and negativity; and precious human existence, milu rinpoche, as explained here. So we'll be looking at what is exceptional about a life in which we are aware of this condition and the potential for liberation. And then the intermediate one is there where we're perhaps aware of cause and effect, but driven by the kleshas and our particular karmic patterning, then we go back and forth between virtue and negativity, stuck in habitual patterns. So Kangyur Rinpoche continues, from their lofty position in samsara, they plunge again into evil circumstances. So now we're going to enumerate the sort of unfortunate conditions that we could be stuck within. Then, for example, being born as a long-lived god. Moreover, thus they wander in the three lower realms, in the heavens of the insensate gods without perception, the sort of the realms of samadhi, or the barbarous regions where Dharma is not heard, simply just places where Dharma is not understood. They are born physically or mentally handicapped, challenged and limited, have wrong views, not really an understanding that takes into account past and future lives, the cause and effect, the potential for enlightenment, samsara and nirvana, and take birth in places where no Buddha has appeared. So where there's no possibility whatsoever of even considering the possibility of freedom. So these are then further elaborated upon here. So the heading is 8 conditions in which there is no freedom to practice the Dharma. And in the root text we read, on blazing iron grounds, without reprieve, with dreadful weapons, wounded time and time again, The denizens of hell are slain, but cannot die, still tangled in the webs of hatred's evil deeds. So this is where we need to again take into account that we're dealing with a science that extends beyond the science that we're ordinarily familiar with and the worldview that we're ordinarily familiar with. But it's interesting that within the ordinary world, we very often listen to a science that speaks about phenomena that we're not, that we can't perceive. We can, for example, talk about the submolecular particles and all these, where we trust the veracity of the science that we subscribe to. We can hear about places we've never been. I've never been to Argentina, but I do believe that it's out there. I trust in that. I happen to be I belong to the people who believe that the moon landing actually did to take place and so forth, simply just from trusting the particular authorities and so forth. And so even though I haven't been to the moon, Argentina, or can directly perceive submolecular particles and so on, then I trust that. And similarly also, I trust when the Buddha and the sages that have followed the Buddha, they speak about these different realms, simply from understanding that theirs is the scope of what they know what they're talking about. At the same time, also, we very often in modern Buddhism, we then confine ourselves to talking about the causes of these 6 realms. And that's where modern teachers of Buddhism very often just stick to speaking about the psychological causes of these and identifying how the potential for these realms exists within our subjective disposition. And we can identify the hell realm within our own anger. We can identify the hungry ghost realm within our own poverty-stricken greed, the sort of the aggression and the jealousy of the demigods within our own jealous dispositions, etc., etc. But here we are talking about how this plays out in the full-blown experience, really, where there's an experience of an individual inhabiting a realm, just like we presently within the human realm experience our particular human body within a particular, you could say, human realm, such as we do. So that's where then we proceed to speak about these 6 realms and the particular predicament of this predicament and suffering of these realms. And then describing then you could say, the manifestation of aggression and anger, then describing the hell realm. Kangyur Rinpoche comments then, on the ground of burning iron, without a single moment of relief, beings are slain again and again by the henchmen of the Lord of Death, who brandish frightful weapons, swords, and hammers, and inflict terrible pain. Until their evil karma has been exhausted, these beings in hell are unable to die. And due to karmic effects resembling the cause, in other words, their compulsive tendency to negativity, they're caught in a web of evil karma inspired by hatred, and their infernal lifespan is measureless. The thing about the cause of hell, which is aggression, seeing that the cause of our anger and our agitation lies out there in the other and perpetuating war with the other, the environment, the others, whatever, this results in a continually self-perpetuating experience of negativity, where increasingly then the environment rises up as the enemy. And that's where the hell realm is, unfortunately, this condition that tends to be self-perpetuating for a very, very long time, because it continually has the experience of the environment being the cause of our suffering, the experience of others out there aggressive towards us, an incredibly hostile environment, and so forth. And so within our own disposition, there is this continual perpetuation of the causes. And so we talk about this, the karmic effect resembling the cause. Let's see what the footnote says. See chapter 3, negative actions. This is then where you can say our particular disposition is reflected within the environment. So that's where the hell realms, they are, as we presumably know, they are seen to go on for a very, very long time. So then the root verses, Jigme Lingpa says, writes here, what need is there to say that hungry ghosts are racked by want? For food they find not even pus or blood or filth, and streams and orchards dry before their eyes. Their vitals burn in endless pain, their length of life uncertain, measured by the strength of obscuration. So that's also where in the modern world we're again challenged, because you could say within the world view of cultures in which there's more sensitivity to the unseen entities beyond just the human realm and the animal realm and so on, there's very much an awareness of these other realms, and particularly hungry ghosts. And as many of us are probably familiar with practices such as the Ryu Sangche and the offerings to various unseen entities and so on, there is this whole dimensions of what we call pretas, the tortured spirits that are between death and rebirth, also very much attached to their particular locations in which they lived, and various sort of tortured experiences, psychological experiences. Then there is this whole realm of the ghost realm. And of course, within our modern world, we have sort of various anomalies in which individuals perceive this, but it's generally sort of seen as something that's not properly really understood. And certainly within Buddhist cultures, this is something that's very much part of the landscape. And so there's a continual awareness of the presence of pretas. Kangyur Rinpoche says, pretas generally are completely deprived of food and drink. They do not find even the slightest filthy fragment of pus, blood, or excrement to eat. So pretas are continually looking for these. And if you look in Words of My Perfect Teachers, there's descriptions then of how pretas, they're sort of like, they rush towards any kind of something that could possibly just you could say relieve their thirst and their hunger, even the most filthy objects such as pus or blood or excrement. So Kangyur Rinpoche continues, no need to say then that they are tormented by hunger and thirst. The cooling effect of the moon in summer and the warming effect of the sun in winter are all reversed. Rain and hell are misperceived as lightning and thunderbolts, and the rivers are filled with pus and blood. So in India and in Asia, very often the moon is seen as something that offers relief, particularly in the warm season where the heat of the sun is seen as being torturous and extremely hot. Then the moon is seen as something that gives relief. And likewise, also the sun is seen as something that provides relief from the cold and so forth. So the environment is seen as very often providing relief from the various discomforts that we have. But for the pretas, it's not at all like that. Likewise, also the weather conditions for them is misperceived as being sources of intense pain, and so forth. So Kangyur Rinpoche writes, for pretas that are afflicted outwardly, streams and orchards dry up as soon as they look at them. Those afflicted inwardly have heads that are not in proportion to their bodies. Their mouths are as small as the eyes of a needle. So they are pretas that move outwardly, and they sort of seek the relief or seek their sustenance from the outside. And they're concerned about the outer world. Those that are afflicted inwardly are simply just suffering because of their particular bodies and their inabilities to properly use their senses. And so they have these experiences of having the mouths, even though they might come across something that they can sustain themselves on, their mouths are so small that they can't ingest the drink and the food, and also their bellies are enormous. So even if they get food, they never ever are satisfied. He writes, even if they swallow a little food and drink, it scorches their intestines and they suffer intolerable pain. Their lifespan is uncertain, depending on the strength of obscurations due to former avarice. So due to their former actions then, which is essentially the condition of poverty, avarice. Sometimes we think of karma in terms of, you do something and then this result comes about. And that's a rather primitive understanding of karma. It's fair enough, and it goes beyond the sort of the deterministic, fatalistic idea that this is just your karma and you can't do anything about it. But karma, when it's understood as cause and effect, it sometimes is also flawed with the idea that you do one thing and that result comes about. But that's not really it. Karma is about there's a cause, yes, but there's also circumstances that then influence the outcome of a particular action. But however, we might think, okay, one particular action then will result in something in the future. And we think, oh, that's very mystical. I do something and then something comes in the future. And of course, in popular discourse and the sort of the cliche of karma very often has this rather silly connotation. You do something and that's supposed to lead to something, your karma, mate, and all that kind of stuff. And that's a rather sad diminishing of the subtlety of karma, which of course takes into consideration the subtleties of how actions affect us. But also what's interesting is that when we understand karma, it's not just that it's going to happen out there in the future, but we can actually see how we construct ourselves presently. And that means if we have this condition of poverty, avarice, the difficulty in giving, the lack of generosity, we're already presently constructing ourselves as hungry ghosts. The moment that we can't give is not just that something is going to happen in the future, but right now in the present moment, we're stuck with that subjectivity of poverty. We can see the mind that is unable to give. Oh yeah, I can't give this away because essentially we're constructing ourselves right here and now as possessing poverty. So that's held back by poverty. And that's where when we have an act of generosity, already here and now, we're constructing the absence of poverty. We're already presently constructing a subjectivity of richness. So that's where already in the giving, like St. Francis would say, the receiving lies in the giving. Already the moment that we're giving, we're already constructing the result, which is actually the wealthy disposition of someone who can give. So in that sense, of course, we lay down seeds that will affect us and construct us in the future, but we can also see how this is in fact presence, and we're pregnant with that disposition already in the present moment. So that's how we can see the condition of preta already present within our present condition of avarice, stinginess, holding back, tight-fistedness, and so forth, lack of generosity. So that's where this particular condition of the pretas also is something that we create on the basis of our actions. And Kangyur Rinpoche then says, generally speaking, one of their days is equal to a month by human reckoning, and they live for 500 years of their own years. So that's again where we would say this is again where time drags on for a very long time. Then Jigme Lingpa writes, in regards to animals, beasts prey on one another, are each other's food, and hunters quarry. They are slain by cruel means, or caught and tamed. They are reduced to bondage. Born to such great misery, what can they do? So now we've been looking at the three lower realms, and what really distinguishes the three lower realms is very much the inability to understand cause and effect. Caught in the hells, caught as a hungry ghost, caught as an animal, there's not really the empowered perspective that we have in the higher realms, of at least having some understanding how our actions have an impact and being able to create actions that will facilitate happiness in the future. Lower realms lack that perspective and are continually caught in these reactive patterns where there's just no real sense of how actions drive particular future experience. So now describing the third of the lower realms, which is then the animal realm, Kangyur Rinpoche then continues to comment. He says, in the depths of the great oceans. Fish and sea monsters devour each other, the bigger ones gulping down the smaller. Animals scattered over the surface of the earth, wild and unclaimed, are the prey of hunters with their nets and traps, their poisoned arrows and their snares, and they die cruel deaths. Animals domesticated by man are slaves to their masters. They are tamed and subjugated with saddles, bridles, and nose ropes. So this again is where we can look to words of my perfect teacher. And for example, lamas like Paltru Rinpoche would not get onto horses. Just seeing this as being another example of how humans essentially, create suffering for animals, particularly with regards to how animals are being slaughtered, nose ropes, and there's the very vivid description in Words of My Perfect Teacher about how young calves and sheep are pulled off to the slaughter, and Kangyur Rinpoche gives very vivid descriptions of this in Words of My Perfect Teacher. So Kangyur Rinpoche then, who incidentally Kangyur Rinpoche also was vegetarian, continues to describe, their masters ride on them, tether them, and place burdens on their backs. They herd and castrate them, shear off their hair, and bleed them while still alive. And through such treatments, animals are reduced to every extremity of suffering. Being without intelligence, and that's again where we refer to this inability to understand cause and effect. We're not talking about, you could say, the smartness of the dolphin or the pig, but simply just lacking that awareness of how action drives future situations, future experience. And without that awareness, then they don't understand the causes of happiness. And of course, speaking to a Tibetan audience, then where the simplest action of virtue is seen as just the ability to recite the Mani mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum. Even that is, the animals are prevented from that. And so Kangyur Rinpoche writes, they cannot recite even a single mani. Yeah, in other words, the 6-syllable mantra of Avalokiteshvara, Om Mani Padme Hum. When beings are born in such condition, they are helpless. And we are told that the lifespan of animals ranges from the momentary existence of insects to that of nagas and such like that can live for a kalpa. So again, within a worldview that extends beyond just the hard perception of the physical, understanding that which lies beyond the ordinary scope of the 5 senses, then with their insights, then great masters understand how the existence of nagas, for example, extend for a very long time, and also are aware of what we also know from the natural sciences, how you have insects that live for incredibly short moments of time. So then 6, now going to the higher realms, Jigme Lingpa writes, the insensate gods, whose life supporting karma is immense, live long in formlessness. No sorrow do they know, but lacking the support for learning and reflection, at death they have false views, and so lack freedom to progress. So here we're talking about those who, through the practice of yoga and spiritual exercises, sustain themselves in terms of just remaining in samadhi. And that's essentially a condition that is utterly free from any kind of suffering, possibly permeated by bliss, but at the same time also essentially a condition of numbness, in which the actual cause of samsara, namely the cognitive and emotional obscurations, awareness of these is completely lacking. There's no understanding of the nature of the conscious disposition, and simply just there's a condition of having found something that just works in terms of sustaining bliss and thoughtlessness. So that's where these beings then experience what could be perceived as permanent bliss, but in fact, as long as the seed of ignorance is still there, it's only a matter of time until this condition exhausts. And due to their clairvoyance, then as that takes place, they're aware of understanding where their future rebirth lies. So, as such, this is in no way a solution. So Kangyur Rinpoche comments, since the unwavering action that sustains their life principle is extremely protracted, and their lives are therefore very long, lasting for 20 intermediate kalpas, the gods of the formless realms have no occasion to cultivate a sense of disgust for samsara and a desire to leave it. So lacking that perspective entirely in their self-absorption. Mioele. So that basically means the sort of the karma of unchangeability. So Mipa Rinpoche defines unwavering action as a positive action, such as a profound state of absorption, devoid of bodhicitta, which infallibly or unwaveringly produces rebirth in the form or formless realms. Other actions are not unwavering in the sense that their result may, depending on circumstances, ripen in states that are not normally expected from the action in question. So that's different from the kind of action that drives what we call the realm of desire. These are the kind of particular actions, essentially of a spiritual nature, that you could say precipitate the experience of the form and formless realms, the God realms. So then Kangyur Rinpoche continues here. Moreover, the consciousness of the insensate gods, who are without perception, does not operate throughout the duration of their existence. So basically, they're in a state in which the ordinary senses that we have are simply just not present. They simply just sustain themselves on a condition of samadhi, which is absorbed within the consciousness of mind, or abides within the consciousness of mind. Their abode is far removed from that of gods of the fourth samadhi, just as a solitary place is removed from a populous city. So we would say these abide as what is also referred to as the peak of existence. So when this is described in the sort of the Indo-Tibetan model of the universe, where you very often see sort of Mount Meru in the middle and the four continents in the ocean surrounding, then you then see above the palace at the top of Mount Meru, you see these sort of levels that extend above, and it's at the very top of these levels then that these God realms exist. So these are very often understood in some spiritual traditions as being really freedom or liberation, mukti, freedom. And that's where the Buddhists say, well, yes, it's freedom from suffering, but still, we haven't actually gotten to the bottom of the actual cause of suffering. So that's where Kangyur Rinpoche continues. These divine beings have no notion of Dharma, and thus when their thoughts begin to stir at the end of their existence, they conceive the false view that there is no path to liberation, and as a consequence, they fall into the lower realms. So you could say their frustration when their samadhi exhausts after a very long time, but then again, once that time is run out, that past is just like a memory of anything, just like a memory of waking up from last night's dream. It might have endured, like is described here, for 20 immediate kalpas, but once it's over, it's over. Then it has no consequence whatsoever. And with their insights, then their frustration and so on, then they're caught up by the ordinary conceptual mind that once again begins to get a grip on them. So the footnote then says, beings are described as superior or noble when they have progressed beyond the path of seeing. In other words, that when they have realized the absence of self or ego. All beings who have not done so, including the gods of the desire, form, and formless realms, are described as ordinary. The four samadhis of the form realm, the God realms then, are subdivided into different levels. There are 3 such divisions in the first, second, and third samadhis. All of these are inhabited by ordinary beings, in the sense that not enlightened, and not actually having, you could say, proper insight into the nature of reality. The fourth samadhi also has 3 levels of ordinary beings. In addition, however, it possesses 5 pure levels on which superior beings are said to dwell. On the last of these levels, according to some authorities, on a higher yet ninth level, i.e. 17th or 18th of the subdivisions of the entire form realms, are to be found the bodhisattvas who are on the brink of full attainment. This is the realm of Akanishta, the fair, the dimension in which bodhisattvas spend their last life before achieving Buddhahood. The insensate gods belong to the form realm, but are different from the other gods of that dimension in being without perception. They are said to be located in the vicinity of the great fruit, the 3rd level of the 4th samadhi, which is the highest attainment possible to ordinary beings in the form realm. In the case of the formless gods, no locations, even subtle ones, are spoken of. Only the formless gods and insensate gods are said to lack the freedom to practice the Dharma. This is not so in the case of the gods of the form and desire realms, since it says that Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas may manifest here. So we'll look into more detail with regards to the phenomenon of the four samadhis later on. But essentially here we understand then this condition of the insensate gods as being one in which it's again a realm in which there's not the capacity to practice the Dharma, and that they essentially abide in this unconscious, or you'd say this condition that is free from ordinary concepts. So that's where Kangyur Rinpoche says to be born in these states is deprived of the freedom to practice. And here we're talking about to be deprived of the freedom. Buddha conditions that encourage this kind of samadhi. But from the Buddhist point of view, this is where the condition of pride is so eloquent of legs and feet, but yet with minds untouched by virtue. Barbarous men live sunk and skilled in evil ways and wander in the jungles of false morality. So even though this is the human condition, barbarous lands, and that's essentially what we would define as a place in which the science of Dharma is lacking. So we, in Tibet, you would refer to these as the sort of the border regions, which people were very educated. But of course, in the modern world, again, where there's a complete, you could say, pervasive absence of understanding the science of the Dharma, then this basically applies to the entire modern condition. So, of course, then in the modern, it's more complex as such, and with all due respects to the modern, say, condition, there is certainly the sort of the possibility of a global community that one could encounter the Dharma, and as such, there's hope. Anyway, Kangyur Rinpoche says the inhabitants of so-called barbarous lands do indeed have a human aspect, walking upright on their 2 feet, but they live practically like animals and are utterly ignorant of the doctrine. So again, doctrine, when we say doctrine here, of course, we're talking about the Buddhist teaching, but it's important we don't think of it in terms of the sort of a biased addiction to a particular dogma, but rather an insight into the unconditional nature of the primordial ground that is universal to all beings everywhere. So just like we understand, for example, science in terms of understanding that water boils at a certain temperature, we don't see that necessarily as a doctrine, but rather as just understanding the nature of reality, but we still refer to it as science. And as such, then also when we talk about doctrine in the Buddhist context, we're not seeing this as subscribing to a view that was constructed due to some sublime origin or revelation and so forth, but simply just on the basis of properly understanding our reality. That's what we mean with then doctrine, and that's where ignorant of that doctrine is simply just ignorant with regards to the nature of reality. And then on the same basis, then understanding what is constructed. Once you understand this reality, we speak about virtue. virtue, Kangyur Rinpoche says, is foreign to their minds, meaning those who simply just are basically unable to understand reality. And so they're given over to negativity. They live immersed in various kinds of evil activities, such as wounding others with poisoned arrows, and even making it a tenet of their religion. Of course, we can juxtapose these kind of practices to the modern condition in various ways. Kangyur Rinpoche then continues, they wander in the undergrowth of false views and, worse than animals, turn upside down the moral principles of what is to be adopted and what is to be rejected. And again, that's where when we talk about false views, when we talk about false views, we talk about, for example, the 10 negative actions. Those are body, speech, and mind. This belongs to the last of mind, but it's actually seen as being the worst of all the negative actions, worse than killing or stealing and so forth. And that's where false views is this essential absence of understanding the nature of consciousness, the nature of past, future lives, is absence of understanding cause and effect, and absence of understanding samsara and nirvana. Trungpa Rinpoche, very interesting, particularly because you could say the traditional way of defining false view is this lacking understanding of cause and effect, past and future lives, and so forth. But Trungpa Rinpoche also, sort of more drawing on the third turning of the wheel, also says false views also lies in not appreciating the sacred, simply just not understanding the potential for enlightenment, not understanding Buddha nature. That also then permeates the modern condition in which there's a sort of a lack of appreciating that. Then, as we can see here, then all kinds of confused practices emerge from that. So Kangyur Rinpoche then concludes then, to such individuals, the way of liberation is unknown to them. The way of liberation is unknown to them. Okay. I might stop here and see if there's any questions. There's a question that has troubled me for a while. What is it that makes us follow this path? Is it just merit? What is it that ensures that we continue on the path and not just get fed up and give it up one day? And also the manner with which we continue on the path, level of involvement. Well, you actually said it, it's merit, because we could very well have good karma. We might be educated, we might be sophisticated and have all sorts of insights and so on. But if that capacity doesn't go in the direction of freedom, then we actually wouldn't even appreciate. We come across this, and it's interesting because we can come across the path in so many different ways, and what draws us in might not necessarily just be a rational understanding of you'd say the hard logic and science of Buddhism, but it might be meeting someone that deeply touches us. And again, what is it that touches? We could have been touched by, the impressive, you could say, entrepreneurial skills of Richard Branson and dedicate our life to that, right? But somehow we have this merit to appreciate the brilliance of, let's say, meeting His Holiness the Dalai Lama, meeting Sakya Trinzen, meeting Tsongsa Gyalme Khyentse Rinpoche, Jigme Khyentse Rinpoche, Chukupema Wangdil, and sublime beings, in which what attracts us to them has nothing to do with their particular entrepreneurial skills or their accomplishments within the world, but a deep sense of appreciating the truth of them. And that is, again, having that capacity is not something to be taken for granted. And that's why we say this comes about due to some very, 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 very fortunate circumstances beyond winning in the lottery. And then the commitment, us understanding the value of this, is, of course, again, a question of merit, where extraordinarily, then very often we see practitioners embracing belief systems that go way beyond what you could say, peers within their particular societal context and so forth, their environment, their heritage, and so on, subscribe to. So all of this comes about through merit. So we can't emphasize enough the value of the accumulation of merit. So as much as this sometimes sounds very materialistic, you know, the value and importance of accumulating merit, it is in fact putting into place the conditions within relative truth for us to actually have the connection to the path. So that's where we, and what is very much also the spirit of what we're talking about presently, is that right now we have the opportunity, but as you're saying and what you're suggesting, yes, we might not have the the sort of the vision and the perseverance and the merit to continue at all times. Also, Padampa Sanjay says, you know, the important to practice while we have faith. Even faith is something that could very well disappear. So while all the conditions are there, we need to make use of it. So this is a very, very good question. Very clear, I hope. I hope I'm answering it properly. Where do I find the root verses, please? Yeah, I know. I don't know if yeah. Look, I'll upload it. I'll at least upload the first chapter. I'll upload them chapter by chapter. They must be in the, look in, they're actually, sorry, they are sitting in the printed edition. They're also in the Kindle edition, but they're sitting in the beginning of the book. So when we're looking presently at the Kindle edition, as you can see here, we're at a page 119 or whatever. So the first part of the book has all the, yeah, no need for me to upload anything. You can find it in the book itself. Exciting to be getting into the text. Thank you. Good. Hi. Does karma work within the sphere of samsara being's perception? It is said every individual's perception is different, so karma can only be perceived by oneself, not by anyone outside. Thank you. That's true. Well, karma is the very nature of samsaric beings' perceptions. So karma is the way that on the basis of our fundamental ignorance, we then conceive self, other, we develop the toxic relationship with our world, and this is what we call the afflicted states of mind, of kleshas, sometimes called conflicting emotions, afflictions, etc., basically kleshas. And these, when we act on these, they begin to become part of us. They become habitual, you could say, reactive patterns in which we construct ourselves, like I was talking about poverty and avarice before, right? And it also constructs our experience of the world around us. So we would say a sentient being is composed really of a sense of body, a sense of environment, and a consciousness that constructs these. And so we all have, you're right, we have our individual karma, but we also have shared perceptions with others. So it's right, every one of us have our own particular, what we would call karmic perception, just like we all have individual dreams. But in our waking state, we're experiencing shared perceptions. So this is quite a big topic. But anyway, that's how we should understand karma. Then again, referring to the first question, but if it's just merit, then do we have a choice? Meaning if our merit runs out, so to speak, then it's out of our hands. This troubles me. Well, it should trouble us. The teaching is intended to trouble us. We presently have everything in our hands, but it's right, we could run out of, you know, we have an inheritance. And it's important that we don't squander the inheritance, that we invest wisely. And that's where we presently have, you know, some very good, you could say, advisors that are guiding us in terms of laying down the conditions for generating merit. So we're not just going to run out. Like, for example, when we would say we dedicate the merit at the end, well, that is because there is merit in what we're doing, but for us not to, you could say, just spend that merit, we dedicate. And that's where we say it's like a drop of water, the little merit we have perhaps from an action, virtuous action, but then we put it into the ocean. And that's why it's so valuable to have this guidance in how to administrate our merit. The whole path is about that. You know, people balk at the sort of the idea of doing mandala offerings in the context of the Nyingro, but this is why we train our minds in this wealth that is creating the conditions for wealth within an ordinary samsaric conditions, and also wealth in terms of meeting with the path. So hence we offer merit in terms of both samsara and nirvana. If we offer the 3 kaya mandala, we're offering the conspicuous qualities of the phenomenal world, but also offering the subtle qualities of the Sambhogakaya kaya and the Nirmana kaya aspects of reality. So this is again a biggie, but again, this is where we need to rely on the guidance of our teachers to, you could say, in a way, what to do with this information, practice the teachings we received. But what's good about these kind of studies is that it really bolsters and enables us to understand the incredible value of the teachings that we've received. The root verses on, sorry, then somebody says, is enlightenment ending all karma? Yes. That is where we're free. Karma is the patterning that we're stuck in, and we need to presently take that into consideration. That's where, on the basis of karma, we can accumulate good circumstances, but that's not enough. We also need to accumulate merit. So that's where we shape our samsaric condition to be a place in which we encounter the teaching, we can practice the path, we can aspire to, in all our lifetimes, encounter the teaching, practice the teaching, and so on. And that's because we're in the condition of delusion of samsara. Once we're free from karma, then we're no longer limited. And that's also why at that point we can benefit sentient beings infinitely. So that's where enlightenment is not only about us becoming free, but also from the condition of enlightenment benefiting others. The root verses are not in my book. Yeah, I think you're right. So Treasury of Precious Qualities, 2001. Yeah, I think you're right. That's where there's a revised edition where they have included it. I know this is, yeah. Well, look, in this case, then I think I've managed to. I think I have it. Okay, I'll make sure that the root verses for what we're studying will be available in the resource folder. Thank you. Sometimes I feel like I still can't fathom these fortunate conditions, make me tear-eyed. Yeah, you know, it's vast and beyond our comprehension. And in a way, you know, the more we actually look into the teaching, the more we're able to appreciate things that weren't clear to us. So that's why, even as practitioners, it's still very valuable for us to look into the studies, because, like Tolkien Rinpoche once said to me, you know, the highest goal of the understanding you get through study is greater faith. So it's not just that we become, you could say, cold-hearted scholars, but we actually become fiercely motivated to pursue the practice of the path. Okay. Okay, we'll leave it at that. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the Holy Gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. Thank you. Thank you, La.